Welcome to the Electric Vehicle Solutions presentation. We're going to do an introduction to transportation energy solutions and why this topic is important in a world of many competing needs. My name is Tom Coleman. I'm from the Climate Reality Project, Chicago Metro chapter. This is part 4 of the Electric Vehicle Solutions. Hopefully you've completed the reason why we're doing all this, which is the emissions overview, solution summary, home energy, and now we're on to transportation. Our next stop will be home electrification, and then we'll talk about moving to the electrification pledge. Today, most people are pledged to the fossil fuel companies by the machines they use, and we'll talk about how to get from those machines to electric machines. So that's really kind of the 7-step process. Now, the presentation, the agenda for this presentation would be energy solutions, automaker trends, gasoline versus EV comparison, charging, 9 EV misunderstandings. We'll spend a little bit of time on that. There's a lot of misinformation out there on that. Emission comparisons, we'll do a transition timeline, a bit about tax credits, and finally, we will conclude. I want to remind you that we're here in the green area. 75% of the emissions can be eliminated through electrification. We're focusing in these presentations on the green area. 42% of the decisions are yours to make about what to do in these areas. We no longer are held hostage to the fossil fuel industry to continue to buy the machines that use their products. We can make decisions to move to other forms of machines now, and we'll get more into that as we go through this. So most of the solutions are available now. The scope of this is 253 million personal vehicles. And on top of that, if you wanted to include some trucks and so forth, it'd be about another 20 or 30 million vehicles that we won't deal with today. We'll be dealing with personal vehicles in your home. In other presentations, we'll talk about buildings, and we'll talk about the fact that these machines last 10 to 20 years. In the case of automobiles, I think it's around 12 to 15 years. So you may not keep it that long, but somebody's going to have it. So the decision you make is pretty critical next time you have to make a decision. So when we look at the breakdown on the average American's carbon emissions, where does it come from, kind of our footprint here, we'll be focusing in on the transportation, that 28% of emissions. And as I said, of that, the light duty emissions would represent most of it. In the United States, the light duty emissions would be 59% of all emissions. Believe it or not, it's way more than medium duty trucks and buses, way more than aircraft, way more than rail and ships and other, which would be 5%. It's because of the sheer volume of 253 million or more vehicles that it overwhelms these other areas. Nothing says a car is more than an airplane. What it is we have just so many of them that we have to really transition. So in the case of what we'll talk about today, we'll talk about a typical car with a typical average miles. It's about 5 metric tons or about 12,000 pounds of emissions each year. So a typical family would have 2 cars, 1.5 to 2 cars on average. So I'm cutting it down to about 8 metric tons or so that we would be focusing in on here today. Now, on this chart, we talk about the from fossil fuel machines to the clean machines on the right. So we're going to focus on the red area, the fossil fuel gasoline and diesel automobiles. Mostly we're talking about personal vehicles. So we're talking about mostly gasoline, and move to zero emissions electric vehicles. All right. The mantra or the tagline would be clean and green transportation, and we must stop burning things. Just like when we talked about energy from our home, no need to burn things. We're talking about our vehicles. There's no need to have engines that burn things. So we're talking about reducing emissions, reducing costs, optimizing by charging these vehicles also on best forms of energy, which in the case of the home would be solar. So the good news, as you can see in this graph in the bottom right-hand corner, is we're going right through the roof in terms of global EV sales. Despite what some magazines and pundits want to say about how EVs are like going through the floor. They absolutely are not, and we'll talk more about that. So it's Rocky Mountain Institute is saying that 2030 timeframe, that'll be the year where electric vehicle sales will exceed 2/3 of all new car sales globally. 6 years, that's all we're talking about here. And the U.S. Department of Energy is saying that the rapid adoption of zero emission electric vehicles will move the whole nation close to an 80% or more drop in transportation greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 from the 2019 level. Now, at first look, this looks like a really good thing. However, by 2050, we have to be net zero, right? So that means we need to be closer to 100%, not 80%. So that would be my criticism of this, to do better than 80%. But at least the Department of Energy is saying it's big. Now, when we look about what different manufacturers are doing, Ford sold out of their all-electric F-150 Lightning pickup truck, more than 200 vehicles before production even began in April of 2022. Now, like many of these automakers, they've scaled back a little bit of the things because they've had little hiccups in the road, but they're all doing really pretty well in terms of sales. And we're actually getting some on the lots for you to look at, which some people say is a bad sign. No, it's a good sign. People want to be able to go to a lot, test drive the vehicle before they buy it. So this is a picture of the F-150, which is the F-150 is the most popular vehicle, I believe, in the United States today. And this is an electric version, which is no shy vehicle in terms of its performance versus its gasoline equivalent. Now, in the case of General Motors, they've announced that they will phase out gasoline and diesel-powered passenger vehicles by 2035. And some of the vehicles that are out there today, we have some pictures here. We have the Chevy Bolt top left, 26,500, gets a nice 259-mile range. And the Chevy Bolt EUV, if you can get them, they're going to be replaced by a new model sometime, I think in 2024 or late 2024. The Tesla Model 3 at 38,009, great range. VW ID4, Kia EV6, well rated in Consumer Reports. The Niro EV, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, one of the fastest charging vehicles on the market. Pony EV, and the Ford Mustang as an example. Now, the prices of EVs are thought to be, too expensive. The average EV costs, something like $59,000. However, the prices in just the last year dropped 20%, an average of $11,624, according to Cox Automotive. So all the vehicles on the left cost less than the average price of a car. The average price of a car is $49,000. So the ones on the left are all less than that, and the ones on the right are all more than that. So when you hear people talk about $59,000, if you want to buy an EV, it's going to be $59,000. It's because they're taking these very, very expensive high-end models over here, and they're bouncing it off the lower end models over here with an average that doesn't necessarily represent what you have to do. So I just wanted to point that out really quickly. Now, another thing about EVs that people need to understand is that they all have a battery gauge. It's just like the fuel gauge in your gasoline car. And they all have something that most gasoline cars don't have, and that would be the range. How far can you drive on this 100% battery? In this case, this is my car, a picture taken right through my steering wheel. And my car can go 335 miles. Now, typical EV drivers have the option to just plug in every night. And many EV drivers just plug in every night, start every day with a full battery. The average driver only drives 35 miles a day, right? So with that said, are we concerned about range anxiety or anything? And the average EV gets 250 to 350 mile range anyway, and the average driver plugs in at night and starts each day full. So if we now look to the display on the right side of my steering wheel, this is a display of all the charging stations around. So one thing is, exactly how many miles you can drive every day with an EV. And the second thing is you can display in your car where all the chargers are. Your car knows exactly where the chargers are. So you can see here that at Myers, 2 miles from my house in Naperville, is a public charging station. I never go there, or hardly ever go there, because I charge at home on solar power, but I can. And if my charger broke at home, that's where my wife and I would go. And the orange ones are simply very fast ones. And there's 4 chargers here. So you just touch any one of these and the navigation system takes you right to the charger. And you can make it because of the range over here. It tells you how many miles you can go. So public charging generally is used on trips, Or if you can't charge at home, public charging does cost a little bit more, and public charging may be free with the car for a period of time. Like my car, it was 2 years, it was free. And then solar homes have the best advantage because whatever it costs to charge your vehicle, on solar power, it's largely free. And that's the lowest possible emissions. So I not only can be low emissions with my car, but if I charge my car on solar power, it's even lower, which is really great. Now, fueling is different because, as you already know, the typical gasoline car like the Toyota Camry goes to gasoline stations, 168,000 of them. That's where they go, and they go maybe once a week or whatever. Whereas the EV here on the left would typically just plug in their garage or in their driveway. It's perfectly fine to charge outside, and they would go to 163,753 chargers in public when necessary. Now, if they had to charge in public, this is the kinds of places that they would be. So often people don't see big signs saying there's EV charging because they don't need it. The car knows where the chargers are. So here's an example at Walmart off the left-hand side, at Kohl's, Target stores, Meijer, IKEA, etc., Whole Foods, etc. So this is where they would be. Sometimes they're even behind the building. People don't even know they're there unless you have a car that tells you they're there. So the other thing is, what about cost and what about emissions of these vehicles, right? So the link on the left would tell you whether or not a car qualifies for a tax credit. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So if you in the link on the right side would allow you to compare any two cars. So try this out and plug in, the car you have now and the car you might buy to compare an EV to a gas car. In this case, I'm using a Chevy Bolt compared to a Chevy Equinox gasoline-powered vehicle, SUV. The emissions would be 2,372 pounds per year, and that would be mostly charging in a mixed energy grid, the regular, plug into the wall type of thing. Now, this would be like zero or close to zero if I was charging at home on solar. But this is what my zip code says in this scenario. And the emissions for the gasoline car would be 10,601. Now, the per mile cost would be 21 cents versus 32. Fuel cost $452 versus 1586. And maintenance would be 25.57 versus 38.43, much less. Excuse me. So you can see the comparison. You can do this. I invite you to try this out. Now, there's a lot of misunderstandings about EVs, and I wanted to hit them because we want to deal with them right here now. EV batteries have an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty. Most people keep a car for 8 years, although the car may be on the road for 12 years. So if you keep a car an average 8 years, the entire time you're driving this car, it's on warranty. The battery's on warranty in the battery charging system. Batteries are typically never replaced unless they're defective, in which case usually the fact that they're defective happens pretty early in the game, and then they would be replaced free of charge. Now, they're expensive to replace, but they're typically replaced into warranty. And batteries are typically not replaced because it's kind of like a gasoline engine. Typically, you don't replace the gasoline engine, you fix it, or you would fix an automatic transmission. So, an automatic transmission might cost $4,000, an engine might be $6,000, that's $10,000, batteries of similar type of price. So EVs only have 20 moving parts too, instead of 2,000. So you can say in this picture, the EV's motor, this is an example of EV motor. I think there's two parts that you see right here. And the gasoline engine, you can see with the pistons going up and down, the gasoline explosions with the spark plugs and the fuel valves and vertical energy being converted to rotating energy. And this would be connected to a very sophisticated automatic transmission because these gasoline engines have virtually no power when the engine is spinning very slowly. So you have to rev them up and you have to shift. They have to shift. So that's why you have an automatic transmission that shifts to keep that engine going really fast. Whereas the EV needs none of that. There's no transmission. You go forward or backwards. That's it. So the total cost of EVs are generally less than gasoline cars, as I pointed out in the previous slide. EVs tell their drivers in real time exactly how far you can go, as I already covered. And most drivers only drive 12,700 miles a year or 35 miles a day. And they typically charge at home. And like in the picture, they get good range, as I said, and EVs can easily find charging stations, as in this picture. And this 500,000 more of them coming from the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was approved, I think it was in 2021. It's going to put a lot of charging stations out there. It's, put it this way, it's subsidizing the charging stations that are being put out there. They're being put out there by Tesla and other companies, as you see in this picture. Now, as I mentioned, the car knows where the charges are. So in this case, I am located right in the center of this. So let's say I want to drive from Naperville to Chicago and back. That's a total of 70 miles. Am I concerned with the fact that my car has 330-mile range? Am I concerned? How about in winter when it's really cold and the car uses more energy for heating and so forth, and the range drops down to say 270 or 280 miles? Am I concerned about going into Chicago and back? I'm not concerned. So anyway, that is what you need to know about that. If needed, though, any electrician can install a home charging equipment, and most cars come with a charger that plugs into the wall, but they're pretty slow, so they only charge about 30 or 40 miles overnight. So you might want to hire an electrician to put in a home charger. It costs about $400 and about $1,000 to install them, depending on your home. Now, the IRA bill also only subsidized responsibly sourced EVs. A lot of people are concerned about the lithium in the battery, the nickel and so forth that are made in, environmentally challenged countries in Africa or in China, and those are not subsidized anymore. The IRA bill, which was passed in 2022, specifically does not subsidize. You will not get a tax credit for an EV. We have freedoms. You are free to buy any EV that's on the market, but you will not get a tax credit for an EV that's not responsibly sourced in terms of its battery components. Then what's the emissions look like? I think I mentioned in a previous slide that the emissions are 28% nationwide, of which 59% are light duty vehicles, the vehicles we're focused on right now today in your home. So what would the emissions look like? The gasoline car would be about 5 metric tons, about 12,000 pounds of emissions per year. A zero emission EV that's charged from a mixed energy grid, such as ComEd or Ameren, that would drop about 3 metric tons down to about 2, and that would be because of ComEd, not because of the car. And then if you charged your EV on solar power, it would drop it down to about 0.63, almost zero, of which about 0.4 of that would be a proration of the battery emissions to make the battery. Batteries are not perfect. They are made, and there's emissions making the battery. It's not at all what most people make it out to be in the naysayer community. But anyway, here we want to answer the question: should I move from a gas car to a hybrid instead? Well, if we now shift to grams per mile from the Argonne National Laboratories, a typical gasoline car would produce about 400 grams of emissions every single mile. And that would be 81 grams upstream, which would be refining the oil into gasoline. All right. I'm sorry, digging the oil, refining the oil into gasoline, and then transporting the gasoline to the gas station. That's the 81. About 319 would be burned in the car going out the tailpipe. The hybrid, on the other hand, is much better at 219 with 40 upstream and about 179 out the tailpipe. A plug-in hybrid, if you remember to plug it in every night, would drop that 219 down to 159, about 60 upstream, not just for the battery. That would be for the battery as well as gasoline upstream to buy the gasoline, and then 99 would be coming out the tailpipe. The EV would be 109, and that 109 would become less than 50 on solar, which would account for the fact that solar is not perfect. You may not get 100% of your energy from the collectors on your roof or from the solar farm. So therefore, there's accounting for it not being perfect there. So again, to reinforce the previous page, 5 metric tons versus 2.8 versus 2 versus 1.4, or on solar 0.63. So depending on whether you wanted to look at metric tons of emissions or grams per mile, this chart answers the question. How fast do we need to do this? Well, all of these things in the timeline, let's focus on transportation here, would be if we want to be net zero by 2050, as in the slideshow number 1, that video, which is critical that we reduce our emissions to equivalent to net zero by 2050, it means the gasoline vehicles here, diesel, ethanol, hybrid, and plug-in hybrid all have to come off the road, and EVs have to rise and take their place by about 2050. Now, to do that, the average vehicle lasts about 15 years. So if you back up about 15 years, you'd be around 2035, maybe 2033. So you would see how EVs have to rise. The purchasing of EVs have to rise very quickly, and we have to stop buying plug-in hybrids and regular hybrids and certainly gasoline cars by 2035 to 2030. 2033 to 2035. So that would be kind of the timeline. Now, is this even possible? So as of 2022, the top EV countries on the planet would be Norway is already 90% of all their sales are EVs already. They're not down here with the United States at 9%. Iceland, 72, Netherlands, 54, and so forth down the line. China, 33. So we're down here at about 9%. And the way Norway does this is they don't politicize EVs like we do in the United States. The overall signal from the majority of political parties is that they should always be it should be always economically beneficial to choose a zero or low emission car over a high emission car. And the polluter pays principle is used in the tax system, which says there's higher taxes for an EV, for a gasoline car or high emission car, versus lower taxes for low or zero emission cars. So that's how they do it. It makes sense. It seems like a fair thing to do, given pollution and climate wrecking emissions are bad for you and me. How are we doing in the United States? You can see California, Washington, Oregon doing really pretty well. Unfortunately, Illinois is down about 21 on the list, about halfway down. Excuse me. But overall in the United States, we're now up over 1 million EVs per year. Looks like 1.2 in 2023. And we've passed the 1 million sold in 1 year record. So we're on our way. In many of these states, 16 of them have made commitments to cause EVs to be required by 2035 timeframe. So some people are going to complain about this and say, well, the government's, the state's forcing us to do things that we don't want to do. But, is freedom unlimited, or do we have to be concerned about the ramifications of the pollution and the emissions? So I think, I personally think it's the right thing to do what these states are doing. And you can see by the emissions rules and the tax credit rules, battery and EV manufacturing plants are just going right through the roof in the United States, so that we don't source in Africa and China. And the charging stations are going right through the roof too. So we're building the infrastructure to support this. So the tax credit kind of looks like this. For cars, $7,500. Can't be more, the MSRP can't be more than 55K. SUVs, pickups, and vans can be as high as 80K. It's got to be made in North America, though. And the battery materials in that battery, excuse me, must meet certain geographic requirements, which could cause the 7,500 to be 3,750, for example. But it's typically 3,750 or 7,500, or it's zero. And this link that I provided you here tells you where we stand in terms of vehicles that are available. Now, the good news is starting on January 1st, so it's basically happened. The tax credit will be available at the dealer. I think 7,000 dealers are all ready to go with this. So they'll give you, if the car qualifies for 7,500, they'll give you 7,500 right there off the MSRP when you buy the car. So you don't have to worry about filing your taxes, a year later or something. And then also my understanding is on 1/1/24 is the tax credit will be refundable like a rebate, which means some low income people could not qualify for enough to qualify for the rebate. But my understanding, they'll be qualified for whatever the car is qualified for. So if it's 7,500, they'll get 7,500, even if they only paid maybe $1,000 in taxes. That's really good news for low income people. Now, there's income limits if you make over 300,000 married file jointly. Sorry, no tax credit. 225 head of households and 150 for all other filers. And then the tax credit for used vehicles. So the used vehicles are now becoming available because a lot of people are getting the new models that maybe have a bigger range or whatever. So the maximum vehicle cost can't be more than 25,000. Tax credit 30% up to $4,000. On 1/1/24, tax credit will be available at the dealer. There's income limitations like with new cars, only it's a lower amount, 150, 112, and 75. So concluding this presentation, EVs really help family budgets by using money wisely. In my case, I'm saving about $1,200 a year. And if I partner that with my solar panels, that's over $2,200, $2,300 a year I'm spending less of, okay? Plus I'm getting 400 trees in my backyard for the solar alone, for example. So it's money wisely. And it helps reduce the impact of global energy shortages. OPEC nations, Saudi Arabia, you have political unrest. Suddenly you have high, price per gallon of gasoline. And then it helps families breathe healthier air because there's less pollution, and it helps families stay environmentally safe by not having climate wrecking gases, coming out of the vehicle. And then finally, EVs are super quiet. They perform well, and they are really fun to drive. Typical EV will perform at least as well, if not better, than an equivalent gas car. Most of them actually do better. So that's where we kind of stand. It's our choice whether we're going to keep these cars that run on gasoline from these factories over here, like this in this picture on the left, or we're going to plug in and get our energy, clean energy, almost free energy from our rooftops. That's kind of where we stand. Here are the key references. I already explained them several times in previous presentations. They're here for your reference. Very valuable places to go. And then finally, this concludes part 4, electric vehicle solutions. Please move to home electricity. Your home is as big as your car. Let's take a look at what we should do in our homes next. Thank you very much. This has been the Climate Reality Project. Be the change you wish to see in the world.